Try to finish this sentence. You'll never forget your first. I think there are a million things you can finish the sentence with. Maybe it's the first time you got a dog or held someone's hand. For me, well, there's plenty more firsts. How about the first time I rode an airplane and journeyed halfway around the world to land in the Midwest? Toledo, Ohio, of all places, as my friends used to joke. Memory is an interesting thing. What do we choose to remember? And what do we choose to forget? Is it an active decision or something that just happens? I'm no neuroscientist, so all I can say is there are some firsts you may want to forget but simply can't. And there are some firsts that are so pivotal and transformative that they have come to define who you are and the choices that you make in life. Toledo? My first real home. Mid-story. My first and final decision to leave the East Coast for good. Today on the Mid-Story Hour, I've got some fascinating stories to tell you. But since it's our first one, I'm going to start with my own.
I'm one, Lord, I'm two, Lord, I'm three, Lord, I'm four, Lord, I'm 500 miles from my home.
This old folk tune, 500 Miles by Hetty West, was popularized by Peter, Paul, and Mary in the 60s. Well, 60 years later, I'm more like 7,500 miles away from home. But as I alluded to previously, Taiwan isn't really my home. Toledo is. Many families immigrate to this country searching for a better life, a better education for themselves and their children. But my parents brought me and my sister to the States with next to nothing, because of an invisible, almost incomprehensible reason. And because of their act of hope and believing, I, too, have grown to live a life full of hope and belief. Well, for Toledo. That no matter where I go, this place, this region, will always, in some way, be my home. And then I left home, again. 600 miles away to Princeton for my undergrad, and later Boston to pursue my career. I thought I would never return. And then one day, I did. Another unforgettable first in my life. I often get asked by my friends, "What do you do again? Why are you in Ohio? You tell stories for a living?" Welcome to the Mid-Story Hour, the first episode of our first radio collaboration with WGTE. I'm your host, Samuel Chang. You've heard a little bit of my story, and telling stories is indeed what I do for a living. I run Mid-Story, a nonprofit think hub dedicated to progressing the Midwest narrative through storytelling, research, and programming. We believe in the power of storytelling, authentic, productive, and responsible storytelling. We've covered thousands of stories from across all 12 Midwest states, and each week on the Mid-Story Hour, we will share a few with you. Tune in every Saturday from 10 to 11 a.m. to learn something new about the place you call home. And likewise, learn something new about places you've never been. This week, you'll hear stories of brain drain, why the new NBC show The Paper is set in Toledo straight from the creators themselves, and how local news is making a comeback in the unlikeliest of places. If this is the first time you've listened to us, I hope it's one that you'll never forget. Check us out at midstory.org or on our socials. all have some definition of home tucked away in our heads. For some of us, it's a place we couldn't wait to leave. For others, a place we're still trying to understand. Today, we're bringing you the debut episode of Brain Drain, a new podcast series from the team at Midstory. It's a podcast 7 years in the making, and really at the core of why we came home. But more on that later. Here's episode 1, a look at how Toledo became the Toledo we know today and what we can learn from our own history. Learn more about this podcast, explore data visuals, and tune into future episodes at www.midstory.org/braindrain.
In 1868, Jessup W. Scott claimed that by the year 2000, Toledo would be the largest city in the world. Unfortunately, Scott's vision of Toledo never came true, at least not fully. In 2000, Toledo, Ohio was not the largest city in the world. Today, Toledo is not the largest city in the world. It's only the 81st largest city in the United States, and its population has shrunk by more than 100,000 people over the last 50 years. The problem is not just that people are leaving Toledo. Population decline is actually quite common. Last year, researchers predicted that half of all US cities will face depopulation by the end of this century. In order to explain what sets Toledo apart, I need to introduce you to Meg Monaghan. Meg was born and raised in Toledo, and she had a wonderful childhood. When she finished high school, she enrolled at Fordham University in New York City. That's where Meg discovered that her hometown had a certain reputation.
When we were in college, my brother was a senior and I was a freshman, right? And one of our best friends was from Queens, right? And he was like, "Do you guys have a salt lick in your backyard?" And that was his vision of where we lived, that we were like bumpkins, right? This is a pretty cosmopolitan, metro area. There's a lot of cool things happening here. We're not like out plowing the fields every day. We actually are interacting and participating in the economy and have things to offer. But I think we're discounted because they don't know what's happening. So we got to tell that story somehow.
Meg knows Toledo's story needs to be told. Her hometown isn't full of backyard salt licks and country bumpkins. It's full of award-winning public parks and libraries. It's home to a cutting-edge manufacturing industry, a first-rate art museum, and a leading academic research institution. All of these belong in Toledo's story. But Toledo's story is also about a place once heralded as a city of the future, becoming one that out-of-towners see as stuck in the past. It's the story of why Meg decided to move to New York at all, and why that decision matters in a place like this. Maybe you haven't heard of Toledo before, or maybe you have and didn't give it a second thought. But that's exactly why we're starting our investigation here, in one of the most average cities in America. There are thousands of Toledos across the nation, watching residents pack their bags and leave. You may even live in one. And we're hoping this deep dive into the story of the Glass City will transform the way we think about the future of all American cities. I'm Yannick Schaller.
And I'm Dea Kukeli. Welcome to Brain Drain, a new Midstory podcast that explores the city of Toledo through the eyes of the people who've left it behind. The decision to move away from home is often difficult and charged with deep and complicated emotions. And as we'll see through the course of this season, people have a wide range of motivations for leaving, but they all stem from the same central question, a question we'll spend 7 episodes exploring. When is home no longer enough? The answer to this question looms over a city that is searching for itself. Episode 1. Tomorrow Never Came. Even though Toledo isn't the global metropolis that Jessup W. Scott imagined it would be, the city was a lot closer to achieving his vision at the turn of the 20th century. At that time, Toledo was a manufacturing hub, home to successful companies in glass, automotives, auto parts, and scales, to name a few. Many consider this time period of Toledo's history as its peak. Unfortunately, it didn't last long. The Great Depression shattered the city's economy, causing immense unemployment. Only the demand of military jeeps, bulletproof glass, and other materials required for World War II kept Toledo's manufacturing industry afloat. Then, nearly 80 years after Scott made his grand statement, another vision of Toledo emerged. On July 4th, 1945, only a couple months before the end of World War II, a 60-foot model of the city was presented as a part of the Toledo Tomorrow exhibit. The exhibit was funded by the owner of the Toledo Blade newspaper, Paul Block Jr., and as the name suggests, envisioned Toledo 50 years in the future. The vision included expansive highways cutting through the city, multiple airports, suspension bridges, and an entirely renovated riverfront. Most notably, it proposed the nation's first transportation hub, connecting air, rail, and highway travel in a single terminal. The proposal aspired to change every part of the city except for the river running through it. Anyone can admit the exhibit was ambitious. Even the designers themselves provided disclaimers, saying the exhibit was not intended as a blueprint for the city's planners and builders, but as an inspiration for future living. But Paul Block Jr.'s vision for Toledo missed the mark.
My book is actually called Tomorrow Never Came. Toledo has this long history of trying to, I don't want to say make the Toledo Tomorrow idea happen, but make Toledo as the new big city of America happen.
This is Dr. Bradley Summer, a labor historian studying Toledo's role in America's post-industrial era. He sympathizes with Block's aspirational outlook.
There's a couple of reasons why Toledo was kind of thought of as being potentially this city. One is location. If you look at a map of America in 1945, pre-interstate highway system, pre-transcontinental flights, Toledo is kind of at a natural crossroads point.
People had to travel through Toledo to get to other large cities. Toledo is right between New York City and Chicago, the two largest cities in 1945, and right beneath Detroit, the fourth largest city at that time. Toledo is also located on the southwest corner of Lake Erie, right along the banks of the Maumee River. In 1945, Toledo was home to one of the largest ports on the Great Lakes. On top of its geographic advantage, after World War II, Toledo had the resources it needed to transform itself into the city of tomorrow.
So, if you're going to build modern America, you need houses and you need cars, because those are the hallmarks of modern America.
Willys Overland Motor Company established Toledo as an automotive hub during World War II, when the company was contracted to produce over 360,000 military jeeps. And its close proximity to Detroit, well known as the center of the automotive industry, made it a promising place to produce the vehicles that post-war Americans wanted.
Cars are a big part of modern America at this point, and so any city with a connection to cars is going to have a future. The other economic thing that's going on at that point is home ownership, and Toledo is integral to that because what's Toledo's nickname for anyone who's listening and not from the area? It's the Glass City.
It's obvious why glass is needed to build homes, for windows and such, but what really made Toledo stand out was the invention of fiberglass to insulate homes. Fiberglass revolutionized home construction by lowering the cost of heating and cooling. The technology put Toledo on the map and connected the city with markets across the country.
And if Toledo has all the materials that are essential for modern America, well, why don't we try and test out and build modern America in the place where they have all the stuff that we need for it?
Unfortunately, the promise of Toledo's tomorrow rapidly faded.
This golden age of prosperity that existed in the post-war years didn't actually last as long as people think. By the early 1960s, you already started to see corporations trying to find ways to weaken unions, to move their production to the south where unions were weaker, overseas if they could. When we talk about like Toledo had a moment, it really was a moment. Because like by the time people like realized the opportunity that they had in Toledo, the opportunity had kind of been missed.
By the turn of the 21st century, the manufacturing industry that built and sustained the city was a thing of the past. The effects of globalization, failed labor movements, and urban flight resulted in large numbers of unemployment and population loss. Throughout the city's history, it's easy to spot a pattern of promises. Toledo has held promise. Toledo's residents have made promises to each other and to the city they live in, but Toledo is also a place of broken promises. A place rooted in and weighed down by its own history. A place that people have believed in. A place that people have given up on. A place where people have waited and waited and waited for tomorrow to arrive. Bradley Summer says that Toledo's tomorrow never came. But what does Toledo today look like? 157 years after Scott declared it the future great city of the world. 80 years after Bloch imagined its era of post-war prosperity. 25 years after Meg Monaghan left it behind. Today, Toledo is shaped as much by the people who aren't here as it is by the people who are.
For decades, Toledo has struggled to produce educated and skilled individuals, and those that do come of age here tend to leave Toledo in search of greener pastures, bigger cities, and brighter lights. This phenomenon is called brain drain, a consistent decrease in an area's population of college-educated and skilled individuals over a long period of time. The name is not an uncontroversial one, for reasons we'll delve into throughout this season. But for now, picture a city that contradicts itself, one that can offer everything a kid could ever want, but drives scores of young adults away. A city that dreams big, but struggles to build momentum. A city with an industrial past, but that can't seem to manufacture a sense of identity in the present. In many ways, Meg's story is Toledo in a nutshell. In 2023, the number of Toledoans who held at least a bachelor's degree shrank by 0.6%. And that may sound insignificant, but remember, that's just from 2023. This trend stretches back for decades. Year after year, Toledo is losing Meg Monaghans and can't seem to attract enough people like her to take her place. In 2019, the Joint Economic Committee published a study, fittingly titled Losing Our Minds, that compared the demographics behind brain drain on a state-by-state basis. The study looked at how many highly educated adults between the ages of 31 and 40 left the state they were living in. Starting in the 1940s, and in every single decade since, more highly educated people moved away from Ohio than moved to the state. Even against this demographic backdrop, Toledo is still exceptional. But despite all the city has to offer, it has the lowest percentage of residents between the ages of 18 and 64 out of any major city in Ohio, and one of the lowest percentages of people between the ages of 20 and 39 in the entire Midwest. Basically, Toledo is home to young and old, but the city is having trouble holding on to its adult population. Only 19% of the workforce has a bachelor's degree or higher, which is far below the national average of 33%. Now, that distribution would seem to be in line with Toledo's legacy as a blue-collar, working-class city, except for the fact that the local job market isn't exactly oriented towards that type of worker anymore. In 2018, 27% of the city's job listings required at least a bachelor's degree, and a further 33% required some college education. Toledo is stuck between the past and the future, trying to cater to a community of educated and talented workers that have already left the city behind.
Like Meg. Meg was busy in her years away from Toledo. She rode competitively at Fordham University, worked as a photo assistant in London and a makeup artist in Chicago, and then landed a role in business development for L'Oreal in New York City. But Meg, unlike many adults from Toledo, eventually came back, much to her family's surprise.
I think that when I did say I was coming back, even if it's always been kind of a temporary, I've always been like, yeah, I'm just here for now, right? I think they were blown away when I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to come home for a little while. What? Are you serious? Yeah, I think so.
When Meg came back to Toledo in 2019, it was intended as a quick pit stop, just the amount of time it would take her to heal from an injury. But Meg ended up staying longer than expected.
So you didn't expect to love it.
I didn't. I really was coming home to heal. And then I went back to my apartment and was like, I kind of miss being in T-Town, which was a really surprising feeling to me.
That's interesting. Why were you surprised to feel that way?
Because I always felt like there was a void. There was something that Toledo was missing out on, and something that Toledo was not willing to embrace or not willing to step into. And all of a sudden, that was changing.
Soon after Meg's move to Toledo, she was hired as an external events manager for ProMedica, Toledo's dominant healthcare provider. At the time, ProMedica was the primary organizer of the Summer Concert Series, an annual event that brought local and national musicians to Promenade Park in downtown Toledo every Friday. There were some big names, like Gwen Stefani in 2021 and Patti LaBelle in 2022.
It was amazing. It was so much fun. We partnered with vendors from all over the city. Everybody was all in on it. You would come downtown, the city would be full of people, and you would see people from a grandmother to a child, and then you would see people who haven't seen each other in 20 years pass each other on the street. Building that energy and working with those vendors, and I mean, it was blood, sweat, and tears, and it was 24/7 the whole time we were in it. But watching that and watching the life that it brought to downtown Toledo was so rewarding and so incredible.
Meg's involvement in the concert series allowed her to see a version of Toledo she wasn't used to, one where corporations were investing in the community and aiming to bring people together. On top of that, life in Toledo just felt easier for Meg.
Because when you're in a big city, your rent is exorbitant, your groceries are crazy, you're just getting to and from wherever you have to go is a big project. You walk out your front door and you're automatically faced with challenges through every step of your process, right? And here, you can kind of hop in if I wanted to meet with somebody from like the SVP of a department in ProMedica, I could probably say to one of my friends, hey, do you know this guy? And they would be like, yeah. And they would hook me up with them, and then I would sit down and have coffee with them. That doesn't happen in a bigger city, right? And those opportunities make it so much easier to see change and to be a part of growth.
Seeing change in Toledo as a city was one thing, but Meg also noticed a shift in her personal life.
I've lived a lot of life, right? And I've made better friends here than I have at any point in my life. And I think part of that is having the space and the time to actually nurture friendships, because you're not in fight or flight mode all the time, right? You can actually check in on someone and say, oh, by the way, how did that thing go that you did yesterday? Or are your parents good? Is there anything I can do to help with that? You know, because you have the space and time to do those things.
Several years later, Meg is still in Toledo. But even after experiencing a fulfilling job and meaningful friendships, Toledo can't give Meg everything she needs.
I like to have a little house and maybe a yard to grow some vegetables and, you know, go out and play and do all sorts of cool things. But those things would only be possible if I found a place to use my skills, right? This is a tough environment for me to use my skill set. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an attorney. I'm not an accountant. And I don't build things. So my skill set is hard to employ here.
Meg had found her fit in Toledo with ProMedica's summer concert series. But the company ran into some pretty serious financial trouble, and its commitment to the event began to waver. In March of 2023, ProMedica announced that the series would be cut from 8 to 4 performances, and asked the city and the county to donate $100,000 each to fund the concerts. That amount was triple what the city had paid the year before, and $25,000 higher than the county's previous contribution, but both ended up agreeing to the proposal. County Commissioner Pete Gerken said the concert series was still worth investing in because it brought new visitors and valuable business to the community. Even in its shrunken state, the 2023 series was a hit. But that fall, ProMedica pulled the plug, and Meg moved on. With ProMedica in crisis, Toledo was missing one of its largest forces of change. But even if the concert series had survived, Meg knows that the city needs more than just some live entertainment on one night every week. She knows that Toledo needs to deliver for its young people with greater consistency.
I mean, in order to stay and to remain creative and engaged in what you're doing, you need to be fed elsewhere. You know, the organizations that are here and that are set up to feed us that way don't have the resources to do so. So you got to go. It's sad. I'll give you an example. I have a family member who is in their 20s, brilliant, right? And a seeker, wants to know more, very curious, always wants to see things and learn things. And they are thinking about leaving because when the workday is over and all the obligations of showing up for committee or showing up for a community event or any of those things are done, what's she supposed to do? Go to a bar and drink? That's not really productive or healthy. The last thing you want to do is have to work to find what it is outside of your workplace to stimulate you. As a young person, you want to be stimulated. You want to see and do all sorts of cool things, right? I get that. So there goes another brilliant person that could be contributing to this environment.
As we mentioned earlier in the episode, Toledo is struggling to attract and retain young professionals. We'll explore why in greater depth in future episodes. For now, we know something has to change.
I think what's challenging here is finding the resources to do things differently. On top of that, our city was built on a factory mindset, right? Which is, there's nothing wrong with that. It's amazing. We built incredible things. We put things out into the world that are amazing. But to get past that, there's a very specific functionality to that mindset, right? Because it has to happen that way to make that product, right? But if we want to make a different product and we want to change the way that we're contributing, it takes resources. And those are hard to come by.
I almost want to think of Toledo as an old-timey TV that's full of static. There's an image on the screen, but it's almost impossible to make out through all the white noise. But the TV itself isn't broken. It just needs to be tuned to a different frequency so the picture can be transmitted clearly once again. The problem is how to find that signal, one that's eluded the city from the moment Scott proclaimed Toledo was destined for greatness. In order to bring Toledo's image back into focus, we spoke to dozens of people over the last year, people who have called the city home at one point or another, and asked them what they found here. We ask them about this city that confuses and frustrates and disappoints, but that also inspires a fierce sense of connection and comfort. We ask them what it feels like to belong to a place like this.
To be honest with you, I didn't see Toledo as home until the last couple years. Sorry. And again, it goes back to having the space and time to dig into what's here and what this place has to offer. And that learning those things and understanding those things has made it home. I think I'll continue to go out into the world and see what else is happening out there. But it's a pretty nice place to come back to.
Over the next 6 episodes, we'll follow Meg's lead. We're going to dig into what's here, into what Toledo has to offer, and why it's failing to keep talented and ambitious people like Meg within its borders. Dea and I are part of this story too. Just because we're the ones holding the microphone doesn't mean that we're somehow detached from all of this. We're not. In fact, Brain Drain is a big reason why we're even in Toledo in the first place. Brain Drain is the reason that we have positions here at Midstory. But more on that in our next episode. We'll leave it at this. We hope this series will build a bigger understanding of this city, one that is guided by the voices of the people who have called it home, and one that explores what a place represents to the people who live in it and leave it behind. Brain Drain is a Midstory podcast written and hosted by me, Yannick Schaller.
And by me, Dea Kukeli. Additional reporting on this episode by Marin Warshay.
Our editors are Logan Sander and Samuel Chang.
Sound design and engineering on this episode is by Yannick Schaller.
Original artwork for the series by Ruth Chang and Joshua Rep. Data analysis by Chaisha Kui, Anna Diasio, and Yitong Jiang.
Fact-checking by Terry Brisky.
Special thanks go to our lovely team of interns who called Toledo home for, at least, a summer. Anavi Prakash, Yasu Shinozaki, Rajan Karsan, Martin Burrito, and Desiree Loa. You'll hear from them soon.
For more information, research, and reading material, please check out the show notes for this episode, available at midstory.org/braindrain. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Midstory Toledo. Thanks for listening.
Enjoyed this podcast episode? Brain Drain and the many stories produced by Midstory are made possible in part by listeners like you. To support Midwest Stories and help us uplift our home, check us out at midstory.org or on our socials. If you're just joining us now, you're currently listening to the Midstory Hour. Tune in every Saturday from 10 to 11 a.m. to hear hidden stories from Toledo, the Midwest, and beyond. You can also find this podcast on midstory.org or wgte.org, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you grew up watching The Office on NBC, then you probably know about its spin-off show, The Paper, released last fall. It follows the same mockumentary crew you're familiar with from The Office, but this time, they're following the revival of a local newsroom led by an ambitious and comically idealistic toilet paper salesman turned editor-in-chief. And instead of Scranton, the show is set in, you guessed it, Toledo, Ohio. But why? To find out, our reporter Desiree Lowell got the opportunity to chat with the show's creators Greg Daniels and Michael Coman. Their answers might surprise you. Here's their conversation.
Honestly, we've been very invested in the release of the paper because even though we're not a traditional print paper, we are Toledo-based. So when we heard the paper was set in Toledo, we were very excited by that. To get started off really general, why is the paper set in Toledo?
Well, I hate to say this, but it's really because of the alliteration of Toledo Truth Teller. And it just, it sounded like a kind of a cool old newspaper.
I think that's only semi-accurate. I mean, there were a lot of, if Toledo was different than it is, I don't think it would have worked. It was the glass city. It was a city that you can visualize really easily in like the 19th century, early 20th century, thriving in a lot of different ways. And, now it's a city that has a lot of character, but it's going through a, fairly difficult time, sort of the way that, Scranton was in the other show.
Yeah. And as a word, as a name, it punches above its weight in the national awareness in the way that people have heard of Scranton, Pennsylvania, and they've heard of Toledo, Ohio.
Yeah. I mean, it has personality.
Tell me a bit more about that personality. What traits of Toledo made you want to set the show there?
Well, honestly, it's this middle of it's Ohio, where it is one thing. And it's a city that actually has a history with newspapers.
I think that it makes you think of this time in history when newspapers had their own towers downtown, and they had bureaus in Europe covering, people from Toledo and people from Ohio in World War I or something like that. And it's just a very different time now. And this notion of ghost newspapers, which is not actually in Toledo. Toledo has a great thriving newspaper, The Blade, but, other places in the Midwest have situations where a company will come, they'll buy a small newspaper, they'll get rid of the reporters, they'll just put wire services in, and they'll keep the ad salespeople and stuff like that. And it looks like the community still has a newspaper, but it doesn't really because there aren't any local reporters. We thought that's a real interesting topic for our fictional documentary crew.
And there's an avenue to discover it because they had covered a paper company in the past. And if they were following up on it, this is something that conceivably a paper company would be connected to.
Speaking of the state of local journalism, especially in the Midwest, like you mentioned, obviously the paper kind of pokes fun at journalism. It's a mockumentary, but of course there's this issue of declining local journalism. So I'm curious, why did you decide to focus the show on a declining paper? Even if it does poke fun at it a little bit, why is that the focus of the show?
I think that it's largely an optimistic show because Ned, our lead, comes in with great optimism that he can turn things around. And it's an important topic. That feeling of things were maybe slightly better in the past, but people are still struggling in the future to move forward. I don't know. For some reason, that seemed emotional to me.
Yeah, I mean, I would say our point of view is closer to the main character, Ned. I mean, he's looking at this as something that he wants to revitalize. So in a certain way, you need to start with the paper at a very difficult place, so the story has somewhere to go.
I was wondering if there were any other cities that you considered besides Toledo. In addition to Cleveland, were there any that were on your radar?
Well, we may be a little different in this. I considered other cities that began with T. So I considered Tempe and Tucson, Tallahassee.
Oh, I had thought for a long time Fresno because of a Fresno Fact Finder.
Yes, we also had the Fresno Fact Finder. So yeah, there were some others, and then we went to Toledo to do research, and it felt good.
I mean, when you were asking a question about why Toledo, I guess I want it to sound like there's this deeply considered reason, but I think a lot of it is emotional. If you see the city and it feels right, you can kind of visualize the show taking place there. This sounds going to sound stupid. I like that there was a river. I like that I can picture boats going by on a river when somebody's looking out their office window.
Also, our hotel had a big exhibit about Jamie Farr and the MASH TV show in the lobby when we were there, and that felt like good karma also.
Now that you've mentioned the other cities, I'm curious, is there any particular reason you decided to set the show in the Midwest? Because like some of the cities that you mentioned, like Fresno, are decidedly not in the Midwest. So
Yeah.
why the Midwest?
Well, I think that's maybe one of the reasons why Toledo won out, is that the actual stories about regional journalism that we were looking at took place in the Midwest mostly. Florida's got a different vibe in the national consciousness. Like if you said it in Tallahassee, I just think there would be too much other things that Florida is known for. And California, probably the same. People have a lot of opinions about California that are highly flavored the way they are about Florida. But Ohio has kind of got a nice balance to it, maybe. I don't know.
I think of Ohio also as a place, you hear about it so much during elections. It's such an important state in that way. And it feels like a state where people kind of have to figure out how to get along.
I think you've dug into our subconsciouses.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do think a big thing is just that it has a snappy name. Like Toledo is a name that rolls off your tongue. And I think that's the reason why since the beginning, since radio, it's just a name that people use as a quick choice. It's the same reason Bugs Bunny went to Albuquerque. It has this kind of music to it. And that is in a weird way more significant than you'd think.
When you just make it into sounds, it's like ba-dum-bum. Toledo.
There are a lot of cities that you could say the name to somebody and you kind of just get a blank. But if you say Toledo, I think there's a little bit of an image. We visited Toledo at one point, and on my way out, my last thing I did there was have lunch at a ramen place. And it was one of the best ramens I've ever had in my life. It was just it was so delicious. And I just saw like, oh, well, I didn't expect that. I was wrong. So there's something about that just make me feel like there's more to this place than I would assume. So that means that I can't go in there with a bunch of preconceived notions. It's like any place else, I guess, but it's full of interesting people and it's a modern place. And so you go in, I like when you go in with preconceived notions that you can then lose and find something new past them.
Well, it's also fun to explore someplace new.
Yeah.
And I always attribute this to Tolstoy, but I haven't been able to find out ever this quote. So I'm probably misremembering it. They say, the more specific you get, the more universal it becomes. So like, when you drill into the specifics of a place and you reference the local bakery and you talk about the local sports teams and you think maybe the audience for this is shrinking because you're getting too specific, but actually it's not. It's the realism of it makes it very universal somehow.
Great.
Yeah,
Well,
it was nice talking to you. Thank you.
yes, it was great talking to you both. And thank you so much again. I really appreciate it. And that's all from me. But again, thank you so much.
Sounds good. See you, Desiree.
All right. Bye.
If you're just joining us now, you're currently listening to the Midstory Hour. Tune in every Saturday from 10 to 11 a.m. to hear hidden stories from Toledo, the Midwest, and beyond. You can also find the podcast on midstory.org or WGTE.org, or wherever you get your podcasts. Something unusual is happening in South Dakota. Across the country, local news, especially print journalism, is in decline. So it's no surprise that 4 newspapers in South Dakota shut down in August of 2025. Well, they were supposed to. This is a story of community, rural resilience, and what some call refrigerator news. Our fellows Celia Johnson and Yafa Siegel share more.
So I recently reported on 4 papers in South Dakota which were saved from closure, which is really an unusual story given the number of newspaper closures we've seen around the country. And in the process, I learned a lot about why print news still matters in the state. So our story mostly takes place in Huron, South Dakota, which is a town of about 14,000. And their daily newspaper is called the Huron Daily Plainsman, although locals mainly just call it the Plainsman. And the Plainsman, along with 3 other papers in the state, were owned by the same parent company, which had papers all around the United States. And about a year ago, the parent company began the process of selling these papers off to another company. I mean, this is pretty common in the news business. There are companies like Gannett, which own USA Today, which just own vast numbers of papers across the country. But eventually, the acquisition of the papers in South Dakota fell through. And so in August, employees of the 4 papers were told that the papers were just going to be closing entirely, and they received basically no notice about this. But 2 weeks after being closed, so a very quick turnaround, the papers were announced to be reopening under new leadership, which is a company based out of North Carolina, which saw the story, already had some interest in the papers and recognized that these papers are still immensely valuable to their communities, and so wanted to save them.
Wow. But print media is on the decline in the rest of the country. So what is it about South Dakota that's keeping it afloat?
Yeah, so you're right. South Dakota is really different from a lot of other states. The South Dakota News Media Association, which is the trade association in the state, has done surveys that find that 62% of South Dakotans read print news at least once a month, which is about twice as high as in the rest of the country. I spoke to David Bordewijk, who's the executive director of the News Media Association, and he told me that one big factor is the state's rurality. So obviously South Dakota is one of the most rural states in the US. And Bordewijk told me that that creates a really big sense of community in these small pockets that are inhabited. And so people see supporting their local newspapers, reading them as a community activity, not just as a way to consume news, but as a way to keep a community together.
And with this new ownership, has this affected the output of these newspapers?
Yeah, so I guess I can talk about both the coverage and the form. So in terms of the coverage, these papers used to carry AP wires, so national news. And since the acquisition, they've actually stopped carrying national news. So they're basically only focusing on state and local news, which is really in line with what consumers want, is what I heard from group publisher Sean Sarvis. He said, you know, when they took away the national news, the biggest complaints he got from people were from people who missed seeing the national sports stats. So people were really not missing the national news because, you know, they can access that online, right, through their cell phones. So that's one big coverage change that they made. And then one form change they had to make was that before some of the papers were printed out of house, and now all 4 papers are printed in the same building. So a paper like the Huron Daily Plainsman, which was printed 5 times a week before, is now only going to be printed 2 days a week.
Oh, and being printed at such a reduced schedule, has that affected any of the news that they report?
Yeah, I spoke to one of their reporters, Benjamin Chase, and he told me that it can have a pretty big effect. So for something like an obituary, where you might print the obituary on a Tuesday and then the funeral's on Thursday, right? The obituary is the way you're communicating that information to the community. But if the paper is not actually scheduled to go out until Friday or even Thursday, they could miss that information. And so what the paper does now is they post time-sensitive things immediately to their website, which is, you know, not a super high traffic endeavor. Most of their visitors still read the print edition. But if you're looking for that kind of immediate information, you can find it there now.
So for the Plainsmen, for example, they have an online presence and they are making strides in posting things in a more timely manner. Do you think this has affected the demographics of the people reading the news? Are they making strides to appeal to a younger audience that might not be as interested in print?
Yeah, I think that's true. Sean Sarvis, who is the group publisher of the 4 papers, definitely acknowledged to me that they have an older average readership, which I think is common for print media operations around the country. And he would like to appeal to a younger readership through, like you said, online content. I know Chase, the reporter, has done some live streaming of events. So that really allows them to bring news to people who are active on Facebook and sites like that. But they know that, their core subscribers are really those older people, those people who only read print, those people who might not be fluent in technology. And so they want to continue serving those people. They have no intention of moving away from print news, even as they seek to attract younger readers.
So I feel like a lot of people don't always think about print news, especially now with access to online. So how did you get interested in this topic? What brought you to this piece?
Yeah, well, Mid Story's actually done quite a bit of reporting on local news before, looking at the decline of news media in the Midwest. And obviously, as a journalist, I'm selfishly interested in looking at the future of our business. And I thought that this was really a bright spot, in what can be sort of a doom and gloom landscape, right? A chance to look at a place where print news still matters. And I mean, to ask ourselves, is it possible to take what makes print news so valuable in South Dakota and bring it into our communities and create communities in Northwest Ohio, in Southeast Michigan? I mean, I don't know if that is replicable, right? Like Borderwick was telling me, the rurality, you're not going to see that in our area. But I do think that, by having a paper that focuses on local events, on things that really matter to residents, you can create a piece of media that is seen as an invaluable resource by community members who are then much more likely to support it.
Yeah. I think having something like that in a community reporting on local issues and very focused on that can be really special, especially for fostering that sense of connection.
Yeah, I can say something about that. So something that both Sarvis and Chase mentioned to me is that Huron is actually quite a diverse community in South Dakota. So they have large Hispanic populations, and they also have a large population of Karen refugees. And they want to use the paper to highlight, the diverse experiences of people in Huron. So, Chase said he spoke to someone he knows who was in the process of becoming a naturalized American citizen. And he wanted to know if the man was interested in writing a series of articles about his own experience, just to explain how he as a community member is going through this process and to help other people, understand his experience. So it's certainly not a homogenous community. And the newspaper is one way to help people understand each other's experiences and to I think highlight diversity, which I thought was really great.
I think it's great, especially because it's print media. It's sort of all-encompassing, and you are exposed to it by virtue of it being in your hands, as opposed to something that would be online that might get grazed over. Do you feel like print media has a way of reaching people more effectively than online publishing?
Yeah, and that's an interesting question. I mean, a lot of these papers have really high penetrance in their community. So maybe 2/3 of the residents are reading the paper. So certainly that's a way to get news and advertisements. It's definitely an appealing quality for advertisers to more people. I mean, I guess it's hard to say if they're reading everything super deeply, but there is some evidence. I mean, this is maybe chicken and egg, right? That having people who read local news are more politically engaged. I asked an interviewee, right, is it like good newspapers that create a more politically engaged society or a more politically engaged society that supports good newspapers? And he was like, well, probably a bit of both.
Right.
But that does suggest that people who read local news are willing to engage print news specifically quite deeply in the issues they care about.
And it seems also like they're devoted to maintaining that sort of piece of media. There was another piece that you mentioned in your article about the South Dakota Scout. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that and the people that were involved in creating it.
Yeah, so the Scout is another paper I talked to, and they have a really different business model. So they do have a print edition, but it's totally free. And Jonathan Ellis, who's one of the founders of the Scout, told me that the print edition basically functions as a way to get people to come to the online edition. So it's an online first business model, which is quite different to the people at the other papers I spoke to. For the Dakota Scout, online first is the right kind of business venture. He definitely wants to attract a younger audience than perhaps those other papers are thinking about.
That's so interesting. I feel like only in this area could a physical paper be the draw to an online publication. I feel like that's not something you see everywhere. Is there anything else that you think I missed that you would like to talk about?
Yeah, I guess, it's a happy story with a happy ending,
Yeah.
but not everything is totally rosy for newspapers in South Dakota. So they are facing some major challenges. I mean, one of those is the reorganization of the USPS system. So their distribution center in South Dakota got downgraded. So every piece of mail sent in South Dakota goes to North Dakota or even to Nebraska before it comes back to South Dakota. And that's really delayed shipping service. So a paper could go out on Tuesday and not get to residents who live 10 miles away until Thursday. And that obviously affects the immediacy with which they can deliver news, and it also affects the immediacy with which they can deliver advertisements. So, an advertiser is having a feed sale on Wednesday, and they put an advertisement in the Tuesday newspaper. But if it doesn't get to residents until Thursday, that advertisement was a waste of money. And so it makes them less likely to want to spend money on ads, and that's a big problem for newspapers as well. And newspapers have also seen problems with advertisers due to consolidation. So your local feed store is much more likely to advertise in the paper than your local John Deere outlet. And so, as we've just seen, in the past decades, the buy-up of these small stores by these bigger corporations, that's really hurt newspapers' bottom lines. So yeah, I mean, it's all turned out well in South Dakota for these papers, but there's still hardships they have to face.
Thanks for listening to the Midstory Hour. We have a full lineup for our next episode, so tune in next Saturday at 10 a.m. to hear more about Midstory, our home and our greater region. If you have a story you'd like to share or just would like to drop us a note, please contact us at contact@midstory.org. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, see you soon.
The Midstory Hour is a Midstory podcast produced in collaboration with WGTE. It features original work produced by our dedicated team of reporters, researchers, data analysts, and creators. This episode was hosted by Samuel Chang, edited by Evan Blanco, and written by Logan Sander and Samuel Chang. Artwork is by Ruth Chang and Joshua Rep. It features stories by the greater Midstory team, including Dea Kukeli, Yannick Schaller, Desiree Luo, Celia Johnson, and Yafa Siegel. Midstory is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to progressing the Midwest narrative through multimedia storytelling, solutions-oriented research, and community programming. Founded in 2018 by 4 individuals who found their way home from the East Coast to Toledo, Ohio, Midstory re-envisions the Midwest story toward a productive, bright, and influential future. Learn more at www.midstory.org.